It begins before the whistles and the glory, before the names on shirts and the lights that stain the dark. It begins in the soft hum beneath the stadium lights, the low murmur of dreams passed from breath to breath. If you listen closely, you'll hear them, whispers, not of strategy or fame, but of something simpler, a boy, a ball, and the wind that dared him to chase it, because somewhere, beneath the roar of crowds and the weight of medals, there was once just a child, small, wide-eyed, lunging toward a ball that barely slowed down to let him catch it. Some children play, some children dream, but this one he ran. He ran as if doubting the world would ever wait for him. His name is Cristiano. Some call him CR7, some a machine. But once, long before the numbers, he was simply a boy with the kind of hunger that not even sleep could soothe. And tonight, under the hush of nightfall and the slow rhythm of heartbeats easing into rest, we remember him not as a record, not as a brand, but as a whisper. The whisper of a boy who ran faster than fate. Welcome to Whispers of the Game. Here, we don't chase noise, we trace memory. We don't run with the crowds. We stand with the quiet moments that made them. The soft thud of a ball against a wall. The cold breath of morning workouts. The silence of sacrifice. If you're here, perhaps like us, you believe greatness doesn't begin with applause, begins with stillness. He was born where the land forgets the mainland, on a floating garden in the Atlantic named Madeira, before boots and contracts. Before adoration and envy, there was the breeze off the ocean, strong and persistent. That's where the boy who would chase the wind first learned to fly. But we're not to the island yet. Not the narrow alleys, not the stone houses, not the salt air, not quite. First, we lie back. Let the bed press around us. Let the noise of today blur beneath the eyelids. This is a story we tell gently, for it's made of early mornings and late nights, of a mother's prayers and a father's distant pride, of a boy who never wanted to be like wind, just faster than it. Close your eyes if you wish. Let go of what the day has asked of you. Just listen, just linger. For in the silence between stories, echoes are born. Now, shall we begin? They say the wind speaks in circles on Madeira. It plays with shutters, brushes the cliffs, and rustles through banana trees. It whistles down cobbled lanes and tugs at laundry lines, on an island where cliffs dive into the Atlantic and time often forgets to hurry. One boy listened to the wind as though it whispered his name. Long before trophy lifts and goal counts, Cristiano was a barefoot child in Santo Antonio, a hillside neighborhood in Funchal. The streets were steep, the houses stacked like steps to the sky, the kind of place where your neighbors knew the year your shoes stopped fitting, and the scent of dinner traveled from window to window. Life was close, loud and lean. His mother, Maria Dolores, worked as a cook and cleaner. His father, Jose Dina Severo, was a municipal gardener by day and a kit man for a local football club by night. A quiet man, thinner than his silence, who toiled as much for pride as for pay. They called their youngest son a show-off, always in motion, always finding goals in spaces too small to be real. He was thinner than his friends, quieter sometimes, but only when the ball was at his feet. That's when the rest of the world seemed to hush. Cristiano didn't play football, he breathed it. Shoes were optional, and goalposts were arrangements of bags or jackets. They say he'd play until the sun bowed out, and even then, sometimes longer, chasing any ball that dared roll away. His mother would call him home through the dark, sometimes coaxing, sometimes pleading, always with food that had long gone cold. But hunger had changed for the boy. He fed on rhythm, on repetition, on the promise that if he just worked a little harder, ran a little faster, maybe one day, the island would not be enough. The Aveiro home was small, shared between 4 children, and dreams too big for its walls. Cristiano's bed was often a mattress on the floor. Nestled close to his older brother Hugo, they shared blankets, secrets, and sometimes silence as the house creaked against the ocean wind. It wasn't an easy childhood. Poverty isn't poetic while you're living it. His family had to stretch what they had, threadbare clothes and second-hand shoes matched only by the quiet resolve in their eyes. But hardship never met him alone. It always found him mid-sprint, halfway through a trick, too busy improving to notice what he didn't yet have. But Cristiano wasn't all obedience and charm. He had a spark, temperamental, restless, impossible to sit still. In school, when the world asked for stillness, he gave defiance. The stories differ, as childhood stories often do, but one tends to rise again and again. A teacher mocks his accent, the rough island lilt. Cristiano, 11 years old, throws a chair. The moment echoed louder than it lasted, but its consequences did not miss. He was expelled. And yet, in this moment of apparent failure, something sharply clear. He didn't want school. He wanted the ball. Always the ball. And Maria Dolores, a mother with tired hands and unshakable belief, made a mother's choice. She let the boy go. She gave her son to the game. Not because it was certain, not because it was safe, but because the world sometimes makes no room for maybes. And her son, she knew, might belong beyond the mountain curves of Madeira. So when Sporting CP, one of Portugal's storied clubs, offered Cristiano a place in their Lisbon academy, she packed his things. He was 12. It is one thing to leave your home. It is another to leave your home when you are still a child. And the sea is the only map you've ever memorized. As the plane lifted off from Funchal, tides pulled beneath, but a boy looked ahead. He wouldn't cry until later. They say the day he left, the wind was still, and what came next would shape him in shadows as much as in shine. The loneliness, the hunger not just for food, but for language and understanding. The strange city of Lisbon, where no one spoke like him, where it rained colder and the nights stretched longer. Each evening he curled into a foreign bed and whispered into silence, asking himself if this was truly the path. But he would not return, because even in heartbreak there was clarity. Madeira had raised him, but Lisbon would refine him, and within his chest the same fire danced, the one that flickered even when the world grew dim. His body was still growing, his game was still raw, but he ran fast, faster than others, always faster, because though the island had taught him how to dance with the wind, here he would learn to race it. And the nights stayed cold, and the homesickness stayed sharp, and still the boy turned to the ball. He had not come to fit in, he had come to become. The pitch in Lisbon was firm the day he first laced his boots at Alcochete. The grass held its dew like quiet defiance, daring the boys to slip, fall, rise again. Cristiano stood among them, all limbs and angles, his island accent thick, his eyes scanning with both awe and loneliness. At 12, he wasn't the smallest, but he was the farthest from home. His mother had stayed behind in Madeira. Her voice now lived in letters and weekend calls, short and aching. In the dormitory rooms of Sporting CP's academy, The walls were thin, and the nights even thinner. Cristiano cried often, hiding beneath sheets, whispering his homesickness. To the shadows, the food tasted different. The voices around him curled in mainland Portuguese. They teased his accent at first. Some called him Madeirans, with mocking warmth, and he barely spoke. But what lingered in his silence was not defeat. It was decision. He let his feet talk. The training sessions were relentless, and he asked for more. Long after the drills ended, after the others laughed and limped away, he stayed running sprints until his legs betrayed him, practicing tricks on uneven patches of grass. Coaches began to glance sideways. "There's something," they'd whisper, "that boy from the island." He was growing fast, not just in body, but in intent. The quiet boy was sharpening into something unignorable. But even whispers of greatness do not make the journey easier. At 15, something in his chest beat irregular, like a footfall out of time, a racing heart. The diagnosis fell heavy, the kind of news that sounds nothing like a child's dream. It threatened to halt everything that rhythm inside him, relentless and precious, suddenly fractured. It wasn't just fear, it was interruption. And for someone who had already left so much behind, the idea of stopping now felt unbearable. The surgery was brief, a laser to cauterize the rogue rhythm, but the fear was not. He asked his doctor how soon he could return. Soon, they said. That wasn't enough. He returned to training within days, still healing, still worried. But there was no time to doubt anymore. The wind of Madeira had taught him to go forward, and forward was all he knew. By 16, he moved like sound before thunder, quicker than predictions, hungrier than praise. He played on, first among boys his age, then among those older, stronger, noisier, but soon the age gap didn't matter. He was making defenders stumble, refusing to be pushed around, earnest, demanding, and dazzling. The moment Sporting let him train alongside the first team is still whispered about. Older professionals, seasoned men with lean experience in their boots, found themselves tracing shadows. He spun, darted, cut, and defied. That day, something shifted. It wasn't just that he played well, it was how he played. Reckless in precision, joy wrapped in fury, he embarrassed veterans. Coaches exchanged glances again, but this time in full voice. Something was coming. Later that year, the news came. Sporting would face Manchester United in a friendly to inaugurate their brand new stadium. August 2003. Not every match makes history. This one would. Ronaldo started on the wing, an 18-year-old in green and white against the Red Giants of England. From the kickoff, he undressed defenders with footwork illed with mischief, long-legged acceleration, feints that left even seasoned players blinking into the Lisbon sun. John O'Shea, a solid Irish defender, spent the match chasing movement he no longer recognized as human. By the end of the game, United's players were whispering among themselves, "We need to sign him." In the locker room back in England, stories would rise of Ryan Giggs, Gary Neville, and others telling Sir Alex Ferguson, now stern-faced and curious, to not let the boy go. Just days later, Ferguson signed Cristiano Ronaldo for what then seemed a bold sum, £12 million. Cristiano wept quietly. It was gratitude folded in exhaustion. Because every sprint he'd made at Al-Khashit, every silent night, every misunderstood word had led him here. Portugal was not an end. It was the proving ground he had made it. But the dream had no pause. The transition was instant. Contracts signed, a new language to learn, a new weather to endure, clouds heavier than any Madeira sky. He boarded a plane again, this time not away from home, but straight into legend. He was 18. He was already running faster than the wind, but England would demand more than speed. It would ask for evolution, and somewhere beyond the Channel, in the city of Manchester, where rain drew lines between the minutes like ink on glass, an apprentice was about to meet his greatest teacher. The boy from Madeira was no longer running alone. The sky over Manchester is different. It doesn't just rain, it settles. Grey becomes a blanket, and sunlight peaks in whispers. For an 18-year-old boy from Madeira, the cold wasn't the harshest part. It was the unfamiliarity, the newness of everything. The language sounded like cracked glass. The food was foreign, the buildings too tall, the streets too quiet after dark. But Cristiano didn't come for comfort. He came to become. Sir Alex Ferguson welcomed him not with flattery, but with vision. A Scotsman of iron and instinct, Ferguson had seen more players than he could count, but none quite like this one. "We'll look after you," he said, voice low and steady. For a boy who had lived in dorms, eaten homesick meals, and sprinted in shadows, that promise felt weightier than gold. Manchester United didn't just give him a contract, they gave him a number. The number 7, a burden and a blessing, once worn by George Best, then Cantona, Beckham, now a teenager with sharp shoulders and sharper dreams. It was more than a number. It was a whisper of expectation sewn into cloth. And some said it was too soon, too risky, too much. They weren't wrong. In his earliest matches, Cristiano was chaos. Spins, flicks, elastic moves that dazzled and faded. Moments of beauty tangled in poor decisions. Critics said he was style without substance, a step over merchant lost in his own mirror. But behind every flourish was a purpose and finished. Yes, but brewing. And with each jeer he trained harder. He stayed late, watched tapes, drilled his body and mind into alignment. Every session was a question. Was he good enough? His answer, not yet. But soon he gained muscle, lost the wasted movement, tightened the screws of his game with mechanical discipline. Teammates saw him transform from flair to fearsome, from boy to blade. He was mocked once for vanity, his mirrors, his abs, the gloss of self-belief. But those who watched closely knew better. The mirror wasn't for admiration, it was for measurement. To chart every fiber, every flaw, to refine, to control. He was building a machine. The quiet formula of future dominance and performances. Followed, first came the flashes. A curled free kick here, a blazing run there. Then the floods, goals multiplied. Confidence grew like a looped echo, louder at every turn. He learned to literally, corkscrewing headers that defied footage. Left-footed rockets, surgical passes, and a new relationship with the audience jeers turned to gasps. He listened to Sir Alex like a soldier hears command. It wasn't just coaching, it was trust forged in fire and fury. Sir Alex shouted often. Cristiano listened always. The mentor didn't hold back, because neither did the pupil. And in 2008, it crested. Cristiano Ronaldo didn't just shine. He ran the league ragged. 42 goals, matches won by solo effort, screamed finales and stunned defenders. That night in Moscow, Champions League final, rain slicing down as though heaven wanted to watch, he scored the opener. The match went to penalties, He missed his a rare tremble, but fate circled back. John Terry slipped, Edwin van der Sar saved, and Manchester United lifted the trophy. At 23, Cristiano touched glory, and it didn't stop there. That winter, Paris took notice. The glass orb of the Ballon d'Or stood quiet no longer. He raised it like a promise. The best player in the world, but what's wrapped in gold is also wrapped in restlessness. He had conquered England. Each stadium had heard his name. Each defender had tasted sprint and strike. He had become a giant in the land of rain. But giants, too, are drawn by the sun. Spain was calling, and in the shadows of Santiago Bernabeu, lights had already begun to hum his arrival. The white shirt of Madrid floated in the distance, not temptation, but transformation. But to leave Manchester wasn't simple. He had grown roots in its clouds, in Ferguson's gaze, in the red roar of Old Trafford. These weren't fans. This wasn't just a club. It was memory, foundation, everything that carried him from hunger to hero. Still, his soul was not built for permanence. The wind he chased, as a child, never stopped running. His final season in England was chipped with tension, not animosity, but farewells stitched into every match. The media swirled, but his focus stayed unmoved. He kept scoring, kept grinding, and fans began to prepare their hearts for goodbye. June 2009. A single announcement. Cristiano Ronaldo to Real Madrid. £80 million. Record-breaking, era-defining, and just like that, the rain gave way. Not to sunshine, but to myth, because while Manchester had raised a star, Madrid would wrestle with a god. There are places where even the grass seems to remember. The Santiago Bernabeu white stone, cascading seats, and a hum deeper than sound. A cathedral of football and ghosts. When Cristiano Ronaldo arrived, the stadium didn't erupt in applause. It inhaled, waiting. He came for a price that made headlines before he touched a ball. £80 million more than a transfer. It was a declaration. The most expensive footballer in history. At 24, he stepped into a club that belonged. Two legends, Di Stefano, Puskas, Zidane. This wasn't a move. It was a metamorphosis. Madrid demanded heroes wrapped in elegance, yet rooted in ruthlessness. And Cristiano, sculpted eyes, sharp and almost annoyed by imperfection, fit the image. But what followed wasn't storybook. Not right away. His debut season bore more pressure than glory. Goals came, yes, they always came, but trophies did not. La Liga slipped away. Barcelona, led by Messi, stood taller, more fluid, more complete. The comparisons intensified. Spain had received a god, but Barca had built a temple. The rivalry blossomed not just in tabloids, but in tempo. Messi and Ronaldo, like twin stars, orbiting a single sun, not enemies, counterpoints. One draped in humility and magic, the other armored in obsession and thunder. Their duel sculpted a generation. Every sprint, every flick, every goal measured not just in points, but in legacy. Cristiano evolved. No longer just a winger twirling down the flank, he became a striker, a weapon of decision. His physique sharpened further. He traded showmanship for slaughter. Headers like hammers, left-footed bullets, penalties that doubled as declarations. Games that bent toward him like metal to magnet. By the time he reached 200 goals, the statistics had begun to stumble beneath the weight of his consistency. 400 goals, 10 hat-tricks in a single year. At Real Madrid, he didn't just score, he hunted. But greatness rarely travels alone. There were nights when the crowd cheered before the ball left his foot. Nights of incandescent dominance. The Bernabeu would stand still, a ritual, a rite as he stood over a free kick, eyes low, breath measured, the leap, the strike. And there were quieter games too, matches where he labored in silence, where his face flickered with frustration, where the loneliness of pursuit settled like dusk. Glory has a cost. He paid it in training sessions devoid of laughter, in celebrations that shifted from joy to relief, in criticism that never softened. Some called him robotic, some narcissistic. Few saw the 5 a.m. workouts, the ice baths, the sleep schedules, the endless war with ordinary. He did not come to imitate past legends. He came to outlive them. And finally, he lifted the Champions League again and again and again, 4 times in 5 seasons. The anthem became his symphony, the final his stage. Against Atletico in Lisbon, he tore open his shirt after sealing victory with the last goal. Against Juventus, he scored one of the most iconic overhead kicks the competition had ever seen. Even rival fans stood, applauded, not out of love, but awe. Each season, he broke himself just enough to rebuild better. Each disappointment folded into preparation. He'd miss, he'd grimace, then he'd rise. Always faster, but Madrid, like all cities of myth, offers affection only with conditions. And for all his records, all his goals, all his silver corners of the crowd always held back affection. He was adored, but was he ever beloved? He felt it, and while the world debated his place, he kept scoring. 451 goals in 438 games, a statistic that barely contains the gravity of the feat. He passed club legends. He redefined what was possible, and in doing so, he carved more than records. He carved an era. He became more than a player, a silhouette on a child's bedroom wall, a celebration emulated across continents, a symbol of what happens when desire never rests. But even the most tireless figure can feel time. The adoration began to wear thin. Whispers of new signings, of age, of cost. Madrid, like all old lovers, had begun to drift in their gaze. In June 2018, he left quietly. No grand announcement in the center of the pitch, just a statement, a chapter closed. 9 seasons, 4 Champions Leagues, 2 La Ligas, countless nights of wonder. They built a statue in Madeira, a tribute to their boy who ran ahead of the wind. In Madrid, he left something different in expectation, that goals would always come, that games could always be won, that Cristiano would always be there, and once he wasn't, the silence was louder than applause. He didn't cry in public, he rarely does. But those close to him said the decision bled slowly. That part of him never wanted to say goodbye. Not really. But he was never one for standing still. He had given everything. And somewhere, in a corner of the night, a new wind began to rise. A different stadium, another jersey, a new hunt, because men may tire. But legends, they don't rest. They say decline starts in whispers, a missed step, a hesitant touch. But Cristiano never followed anyone else's rhythm. So when he left Madrid in 2018, at 33 in age, where most wingers had long since lost their breath, he went not to rest, but to prove. Italy waited with folded arms. Juventus, the old powerhouse, sought fresh voltage. And with him came not just goals, but gravity. He landed in Turin with a single suitcase and decades of expectation. the black and white. Stripes wrapped him like a second skin, snug with history. Del Piero, Boggio, now Ronaldo. Seria, was colder, more tactical. Space was scarce, defenses snarled, and the speed of the game beat different. But the old predator adjusted. He outran clock and coverage. He rose not in reputation, but in literal. Height leaping over defenders like physics didn't apply. One goal stood above others. Against Sampdoria, a header suspended 2.56 meters in the air. Eyebrows lifted. So did the bar. He scored 30 goals in his first full season, then 37 in all competitions the next. Pressures mounted, not all from outside. His own expectations loomed tallest. Teammates admired his professionalism, his presence in the locker room. Young players hung on his preparation. He didn't just lead by skill. He led by schedule, by silence, by example. But nothing gold can stay pristine. Juventus won Serie A, yes, but their European ambitions stumbled. Champions League glory remained elusive and retracted like a tide. Criticism flared. Some questioned his role, others whispered of cost, age, influence. Still, goals kept coming only now. Each one felt heavier, less about joy, more about obligation. Then came 2020. A pandemic blanketed the sport. Stadiums emptied. Chants disappeared. Matches played out in ghostly silence. Football changed rhythm, yet Cristiano's pace did not. While much of the world slowed, he trained harder. Posted home workouts, solo drills. He turned isolation into refinement. But he, too, missed the breath of the crowd. For all his focus, he had always belonged to the theatre. In that stillness came a different kind of reckoning. With Portugal, the echoes stretched further. International football had given him highs and heartbreaks, near misses, lost finals. But in 2016, something had shifted. Lisbon, the European Championship final, an early injury. Cristiano on the pitch, in tears, replaced after 25 minutes. But he didn't retreat. Wounded, he stood on the sidelines, screaming encouragement, pacing like a second coach. When Portugal won in extra time, it wasn't triumph alone, it was vindication. For country, for sacrifice. For the dreamer who cried young and ran far. By 2021, he had become the all-time top scorer in men's international football, a record once thought unreachable. One goal past Iran's Ali Dai, and the Portuguese flag grew heavier with pride. And still, muscles tightened. Not in fear. In refusal. The summer ended with a loop. He returned to Manchester United. It should have been poetic. He arrived at Old Trafford amid chants and red flares. The prodigal son returned. A brace on his second debut, arms outstretched. It felt scripted, fated, but stories, even those paved in loyalty, fray with time. What once was a home now felt rearranged. A club in transition, a manager at odds, a team not built around him, nor fully without him. He scored, yes, 24 goals that season, but joy seemed briefer. Leadership turned to tension. The press latched on. Each grimace, each bench headline, rumors spun thick, matches passed, seasons blurred. He gave interviews, unexpected, candid. Some heard truth, others heard betrayal. Words split the crowd. Among chants, murmurs grew, and while some saw a legend speaking plainly, others saw a curtain drawing closed. Then came the unexpected move. Al Nassr, the Saudi Pro League, A chapter few had predicted, many criticized, accused him of chasing gold instead of glory, of retreating, of dimming the flame. But those closest knew better. It wasn't surrender, it was selection. A place where pressure could shift, but not vanish. Where he could show another part of the map that legend still walked among them. He arrived not to dominate, but to inspire. Crowds in Riyadh grew fevered. Children who once barely saw Champions League broadcasts now watched him train feet from their doorsteps. The aura followed him, the cameras, the chants, and the goals. Still, the goals. But it was different now, not lesser, just quieter, as if even the chase had learned to breathe, because he was no longer the furious blaze of youth. He was the steady burn, the figure who stood not against age but alongside it, accepting it not as a fall but a changing tempo, still faster than most, still hungrier, but now aware, now whittled by time into something weightier. He had become not just a footballer, he was history with boots on. When Cristiano leaves the pitch, when the cameras fade and the crowds unravel into night, what remains is quieter than applause. It's the touch of a hand on his son's shoulder, the easy laugh between tenses of the day, the gentle way he folds his body to meet the eye level of a child still learning what football is. He became a father, not in between headlines, but within them. The man who chased the wind found new purpose in anchoring it. Cristiano Jr. was the first a mirror and a mystery. The boy shared his name, his stance, even the flick of his hair. But the bond was in the small things: early morning training, sessions, phone screens shared with pride, matching celebrations under softer stadium lights. This time, the legacy always ran beside love, and then came others. Twins born far from the roar of the pitch, a daughter with her mother's calm, another girl later, born into both heartbreak and quiet joy. One child lost, another held close in the same breath. That year, the world glimpsed not the footballer, but the fragility of the man. The grief was visible but never loud. A single black outfit on the sideline, a pause before a celebration. The cradling motion of arms bent not just in victory, but in memory. In those moments, the public leaned in, then pulled back. Because for years, the image of Cristiano had been built skyward flawless, sculpted, untouchable. But fatherhood doesn't care for statues. It demands patience, softness, lateness, laughter. And in that world, he flourished hidden, not as the best in the world, simply as Pi. Still, greatness never truly leaves the room, even at home. The rituals of discipline flickered on, food measured in exact grams, nights spent in warm recovery beds, water bottles filled a specific way, sleep before sunset, wake before the sky does. His obsession with the edge hadn't dulled. No holidays from the grind. Because when you spend your life outrunning decline, rest can feel like betrayal. Camera lenses caught only slivers, gym selfies that provoked envy or ridicule. But beneath them lived a rhythm of sacrifice. The calculated choices meant not for vanity, but for longevity. Few knew what it meant to prepare like him. Even fewer knew what it cost. And while brands draped themselves around his name, while endorsements echoed louder than substitutes, the man often vanished behind the symbol. Media painted him in broad strokes, arrogant, proud, theatrical. But those who stood closer told different stories of hospital donations left anonymous, of paying for a child's life-saving surgery with no press release, of a man who never forgot the value of presence. He offered support not in speeches, but in actions. Built wings of children's departments in Madeira's clinics. Sent aid when the world didn't ask. His roots showed not in press conferences, but in persistent, private giving. The island raised him. He returned the favor, professional to the marrow, former teammates would say, always early, often the first to arrive, the last to leave. His teammates learned to expect the same, not because he spoke loudly, but because he didn't have to. The way he trained, the way he showed up, told the room what mattered. Everything was intentional. Everything was earned. And even as age painted the corners of his career with shadows, he fought not to hide from time, but to teach through it. Younger players followed him like pupils trailing a master. They watched how he laced his boots, how he hydrated, how he studied opponents until the match was less a game, more a map already marked. There were quiet rituals, too. Prayers before matches, breaths held before penalties, a kiss to each wrist. Not superstition, just memory, cloaked in motion. Tiny signs that even the brightest stars tell stories in their silences. And in cities he never lived, murals bloomed. Statues stood. Children mimicked that airborne leap, the open-armed stance after a goal. His celebration, so simple, yet unmistakable, became its own language. Not just a player's joy, but a worldwide code for achievement, for arrival, for having dreamt and delivered. Cristiano wasn't just admired, he was studied, emulated, not just for the goals, but for the life between them, the posture, the poise, the relentlessness of someone who chose greatness again, every single day, even when he had nothing left to prove, because what he brought to football was more than flair, it was a philosophy. That greatness isn't granted, it's built, sweated, repeated, over and over, even in silence, even unseen. And those closest to him knew he didn't fear aging, he feared stillness. Not every warrior stands on a battlefield. Some walk barefoot across kitchens, carrying children half asleep. Some rise before sunrise, not for spotlight, but to stretch the edge of their ability just a little further. And some live so carefully, so fiercely, that even time dares not interrupt. He wasn't perfect, he never claimed to be, but in a world of shortcuts, he remained the long road. In a world of limits, he pressed deeper, and where others looked for finish lines, he looked for foundations. Because to him, the game never started at kickoff. It began long before, in hunger, in hope, in the quiet hours when no one is watching. And it doesn't end when the whistle blows. It endures in echoes, in disciplines handed down, in names whispered into dreams, in children dreaming not of fortune, but of greatness, and the ability to meet it prepared. When all the noise has fallen away, when boots are unlaced and lights grow dim, what remains is not the roar of the stadium, it's the hush after the echo, the part of the story that begins when careers are supposed to end. And for Cristiano Ronaldo, it was never just about chasing greatness. It was about becoming it, again and again, until even time had to take notice. From the soft earth of Madeira to the glowing marble of Madrid, from Manchester rains to Riyadh heat, his journey stitched across continents, leagues, accents, and eras. Yet through each phase, each rise and stumble, he remained tethered to a presence older than ambition. It was a whisper, a memory carried forward, the memory of a boy who once ran not to escape, but to arrive. There will come a day when the final whistle calls him home, not to stadiums or cameras, but to private places of peace, where boots rest by dusty shelves, where medals hang in quiet corners no visitor ever finds, where his own name returns to him not through chance, but through the gentle voices of his children asking him about the past. And what will he say? He might tell them of that first ball on the cobbled streets, the one that never stayed still, of the plane ride from Madeira, and the bravery it took to leave what he knew for what he hoped. He might speak of Ferguson's fire, Zidane's regard, of victories wrapped in ice showers and ankle tape. Or he might only smile because some stories don't need repeating. They live in the way he walks, in the way he listens, because legacy ... Legacy isn't built in banners, it's grown in choices. In the morning, run done when no one is watching. In the missed birthday because training didn't skip. In the refusal to bend when every excuse would be valid. In the ache that you welcome because ache means you're still trying. He will not be remembered as the most naturally gifted. Others spun silk from thin air, danced with impossible ease, but he forged brilliance, carved it with sweat and mirrors and doubt beaten daily into silence. Not gifted, dash-driven dot. Maybe that's why so many saw themselves in him. Not because they could do what he did, but because he did it in a way that made the impossible look earned. He reminded people that stars aren't born, they're built in training grounds, in lonely rooms, on torn fields under borrowed light. And when the game finally lets him go, not in grief, but with gratitude, it will do so knowing something rare happened here. A son of a gardener became a craftsman of the game. A dreamer outran the winds that once tried to pass him by, and you, lying there with heavy lids and a soft heart, might find yourself drifting, not through highlights or headlines, but through small moments. A sprint, a tear, a goal, not for glory, but for the child he once promised he'd never disappoint, because that's what remains, not the stats, though they'll stand eternal, not the chance, they always fade, but the example, the echo, the sense that someone once ran so hard, so fast, so purely, the earth itself leaned in to feel him pass. And maybe, just maybe, that echo lives in you now, not as pressure, as permission, to chase, to try, to dream above your station, with all your weight behind it. So let your body rest now. The night is long but kind. The stars are steady above, and the wind, it whispers still. It tells of a boy who ran faster than anyone thought he could. And how, even now, though he has slowed, the world feels his sprint in quiet fields, in open hearts, in dreams folded into bedsheets. He's still running, and some part of you is running too.